I think it's about time that we were getting into space about now. I mean, think about it. How long has it been since we saw a really big, actually influential space launch? I mean, yeah, there was Atlantis, but that kind of didn't end very well. And then there was, I don't know, there's been launches to the International Space Station. Yeah, there have been rovers, and the rovers have been really cool up to Mars. But really, we haven't seen a whole lot of cool stuff in terms of space travel, at least not in the last 10 years. Not really in my lifetime have we seen anything cool with space travel. And that's just a crying shame when you think about it. Now, there are different reasons for that. Obviously, there are budgetary problems. We're kind of in a recession. There are budgetary problems when it comes to NASA, where NASA's not getting nearly as much money as NASA needs in order to send different rockets up into space. So there are problems with that. So the private sector is taking over. So NASA has selected astronauts for the first U.S. commercial spaceflight, according to Gizmag. NASA has now announced the names of the first astronauts to ride into space aboard the first generation of commercial spacecraft that will return manned launch capabilities to American soil. With the selection process complete, the astronauts are set to begin a stringent training program in preparation for the 2017 launch of Boeing CST-100 spacecraft. Now, it's interesting that some people, when they think of the spacecrafts, they think that NASA builds them. But that's not entirely true. Actually, the contractors build these different spacecrafts. And the problem is it's usually the lowest bidder who builds the spacecraft, much as it is the case with firearms in the military, where it's always built by the lowest bidder, right? So you have the lowest bidder designing or manufacturing your M16 or your M4 carbine. It's not a very favorable situation for you. Well, that's sort of what we've been having with NASA and the space launches. The space launches, for the most part, have actually been doing quite well, but still, you have to keep into consideration lowest bidder. Ouch, doesn't sound too good. Now, obviously, Boeing wants to be that lowest bidder, so Boeing is that lowest bidder. So you have a really cool spacecraft made by, in this case, Boeing. That's where private industry has an advantage, though. SpaceX builds spacecraft itself. SpaceX builds the spacecraft, and that's it. There's no lowest bidder. There's no contractor involved except for parts. But really, SpaceX builds the spacecraft, and they've been seeing some problems with it. The Falcon 9 kind of had a problem with oxygen tank overpressurization, which caused vaporization due to lack of aerodynamics. But still, mistakes happen. Nobody was on board. It was overall fine, just costly. We won't have that problem with this NASA craft, I hope. So NASA's been working with SpaceX and Boeing under the Commercial Crew Program to subsidize the innovation of a new generation of advanced spacecraft with the aim of stripping the manned spacecraft monopoly from the Russian-made Soyuz spacecraft. Now, of course, currently, the only way we can actually get to the International Space Station is with Soyuz. It's the only way. The shuttle program has been cut, so the only way that we can get supplies up to the International Space Station is from Russia, actually, in Kazakhstan is where they launch from. In the long term, this action will have the dual purpose of making access to low Earth orbit more affordable while guaranteeing American independence in the aerospace sphere. Both the Boeing CST-100 and SpaceX's Crew Dragon spacecraft are making significant strides towards meeting NASA's stringent safety standards. May saw the Crew Dragon successfully complete a pad abort test, during which the company field trialed an innovative new launch abort system, and Boeing was guaranteed the first ever manned commercial spaceflight mission. 4 astronauts selected to fly aboard the CST-100 are veterans of multiple launches already. Those people include Robert Babukin, who flew aboard Space Shuttle missions STS-123 and STS-130. Eric Boe crewed the Space Shuttle Endeavour, and Douglas Hurley served as pilot for the Space Shuttle Endeavour and Atlantis. Sunita Williams currently holds the record for longest cumulative space walk time by a female astronaut, with a total EVA period of 50 hours, 40 minutes. Moving forward, the astronaut, of course, they've completed many other accomplishments as well. Moving forward, the astronauts will train with NASA's commercial partners to gain an in-depth understanding of the next generation spacecraft. So they have a bunch of videos and such as well from NASA that does a bit of a showcase of all the different astronauts as they're going to be launching from. Well, we actually don't know where they're going to be launching from yet. I assume Cape Canaveral. That would be the obvious choice, but who knows? Maybe they'll choose somewhere else. But Cape Canaveral is, of course, the most obvious choice where they're going to launch from. So we'll have to wait. Just have to wait and see. Maybe an offshore platform, which is what they've done before, not manned, but with an unmanned rocket. They did a water, sort of a sea platform launch. It was kind of interesting. So I have to see how that works. But I'm really excited about the future of space. Space is the new frontier, really. It still is. That was the thing. You had the frontiers for all the different generations, right? Like with the as soon as the American Revolution ended, you had the frontier of nation building. Essentially, you had the free enterprise nation building that occurred after the revolution. You had to establish yourself as a working person, as an entrepreneur, as a farmer, which is, of course, in and of itself a form of entrepreneurship. You had to be an entrepreneur in the sense of building a family. All sorts of those sorts of things had to happen, and that was in and of itself a frontier. Well, then later on in the 1800s, there was the Wild West, and of course, there's a Louisiana Purchase before that. So we had that frontier, and then in the 1960s to now, we have space. That is the new frontier. It's maybe not the final frontier. Maybe there'll be interdimensional travel at some point. I kind of doubt it, but the final frontier is space. And it's one that we couldn't possibly explore all of. We can't map all of outer space. It can't be done. It's far too vast, at least with today's technology. So we do have that advantage where all future generations will have space as a frontier. Unfortunately for me, I'm in the wrong generation when it comes to exploring space, because personal spacecraft is not a thing, probably won't be until I'm really old. So that's an unfortunate happenstance. But still, we get to see the foundation being laid for space exploration, space travel, space colonization, perhaps. Who knows? It's really exciting to see all these different things being built. And we do gain a lot from it scientifically and materially as well, because there are different assets that can be had in space that we're running out of here. For instance, I found that there have been whole planets that are made of silicon, and there's asteroids supposed to be made out of diamonds. And there's all sorts of different things that are really just exciting. Of course, diamonds aren't worth that much anyway, so it doesn't really matter to me that there are diamonds having been found. I'm not a fan of them anyway, because they're not that exciting to me. Diamonds are just not exciting. They're clear and they're shiny and they're kind of cool looking, but they're actually not worth a whole lot. They're not incredibly useful except for, cutting, and that's about it. Of course, there's a monopoly that controls the price of diamonds, but overall, they're actually not worth that much, and they're useful, but they're not useful enough for me to have any interest in them. Fire opal is what I think is cool, but that's also not very useful. Anyway, Maker has created a 3D printed poison dart gun. Something very exciting. I like poison darts, I like guns, and I like 3D printing. So all three of those mesh together to create something very cool. According to TechCrunch, Maker Peter Alaric de Simone has created a 3D printed dart pistol that shoots a 40mm blowgun dart using a piston system. The entire gun takes about 8 hours to build and features rubber bands that bring the piston down and resets the trigger. So it appears to be some sort of blowback system. Now, a 40mm, keep in mind, is actually rather large when referring to firearms. 9mm is a rather large diameter. Of course, it's not large in the grand scheme of things, but we see calibers of, say, 50 caliber, which is half of an inch, and 9mm is smaller than that. It's about 20mm smaller, roughly, than that. So a 40mm round is quite large, to say the least. It's larger than 50 Action Express or 50 caliber. It's large. 40mm is huge. De Simone made a point to note that the gun is completely legal and is a direct reaction to the proposed gun regulation that would make all gun blueprints, 3D printable or not, illegal to distribute. He says, if Mr. Obama had not attempted to stifle free speech in this way, I probably would have simply worked on another more innocuous project. But as it is, I feel compelled to act, wrote de Simone. This gesture of protest further proves the obvious futility of attempting to regulate speech and ban simple mechanical objects, both of which are very un-American ideas. Whether or not you agree with him and his thoughts on the First and Second Amendment, the dart gun is well designed and arguably kind of dangerous. Sadly, when makers politicize 3D printing, they create a negative media image of it for the genuine users, although I would argue that 3D printing a gun is in fact a genuine use of a 3D printer. Nevertheless, setting things back considerably thanks to short-sighted legislation of the kind de Simone is trying to reduce. It's a vicious and silly cycle, and I do agree with that statement, but it's not, the 3D printing of a gun is not a silly or frivolous thing. It's something that I think should be done. The printing of a gun is really something that that exemplifies and really just brings to its final conclusion home manufacture of weapons. If a gun can be 3D printed in a simple, affordable, easy way that anyone can do, it negates all gun legislation. It negates all arguments against or for, I should say, gun regulation, because you can't possibly regulate at that point. If everyone has a device which can spit out a AR-15 lower in just a few minutes, then any argument about gun legislation is moot. If there's some legislation against high capacity magazines and you can 3D print a high capacity magazine in your house for $10 or less, then really the whole argument is moot. It doesn't matter because it can easily be obtained. It's like trying to regulate oxygen intake. You really can't do it. It's like trying to regulate how much gas you can put in your car. It really can't be done. So it's a negative. It's just negated at that point. Now, guns are something that I'm a little bit passionate about, you might say. Guns are something which I'm very much fond of. I think that they're one of the more useful tools that one can own. They are, of course, rather expensive now. They didn't used to be, but they are now. Back in the 90s, even, guns were not nearly as expensive as they are today. Unfortunately, there's been sort of a, I don't know if artificial legislation would be the right way to put it, or not legislation, but artificial regulation might be a way to put it, because the prices are so bad on some of these guns that it's difficult for the layman, not layman, but the average person making, say, minimum wage to obtain a firearm. It's difficult. It's not easy to obtain a firearm nowadays. Not because they're illegal or because they're legally hard to obtain, just they're expensive. AR-15 lowers are kind of expensive nowadays. Even an 80% one is about $200, $300. And for some people, you may laugh at that, but for some people, that's kind of expensive. I mean, a lot of people don't have that kind of money to throw around. You got to buy gas, right? Guns are something that are extremely important, especially nowadays when we have the certain situations that we have today. Weapons are not just useful for the proverbial overthrowing of government or what have you. Firearms are also useful for self-defense in case somebody breaks in. Firearms are useful for providing food for yourself should some catastrophic energy crisis occur. We don't know. So it's useful to have, but I would say that it is, in fact, necessary to have, and you have a right to have it anyway. So nobody should tell you what kind or how big or what caliber or what magazine capacity of gun you should have or can have, because really the argument is null and void, because I could just as easily 3D print an AK-47 30-round magazine over at the Chattanooga Library. So it's really just a moot point. It's a moot argument, because you can easily 3D print a AK-47 magazine that is 30 rounds, and it's easy. They are even working on 3D printing AR-15, if they haven't finished them already, AR-15 magazines that can be easily made. So that's something that would not be legal in some jurisdictions. I was talking to a friend from Canada who was telling me that the Liberator pistol, while the files to print them are not illegal owned, just as they're not here, 3D printing it would be illegal because it has a barrel length that is lower than is allowable for barrels on handguns in Canada, which is a little bit sad, honestly. It's unfortunate. Fortunately for us here in the States, we don't have any such regulation, at least not in Tennessee and Georgia or Alabama, I'm sure, about regulations of barrel length on handguns. I've never even heard of that before. I talked to my friend in Canada, so I've never heard of that legislation being a thing, but apparently it is, unfortunately. So we don't have that problem here. But the Liberator pistol, I think, has a 2 to 3 inch barrel. I think it's a really short barrel. And the Liberator pistol, just as a rundown, is a 3D printed handgun that functions essentially as a single shot handgun. And I believe it shoots 380 ACP. I don't feel comfortable with 380 ACP and that sort of thing. Honestly, 25 ACP, I would feel a little bit better at, 25 or 32. But 380, that's a little bit pushing it for me with the plastic barrel. But anyway, it has a plastic barrel, and you load the round into it. Of course, there's no rifling, but it has a firing pin that's made out of a nail or sewing needle or what have you. The hammer is actuated with your manual actuation, where you move it with your hand, and the barrel has a rubber band wrapped around, or multiple rubber bands wrapped around to create tension, so that the hammer comes back and strikes the firing pin, which strikes the primer on the round, which fires it out of the plastic barrel. It's not a sturdy design by any means. I don't think you would be in huge danger of bodily harm. I just don't trust it personally, just because I have better options. But if it were my last resort and I had to use a weapon and that was the only option, I'd use it, but I would not feel comfortable with it in my hands. I'll put it that way, just because it's a rather dangerous thing. I mean, it doesn't seem very safe to me. But okay, I mean, if you want to use it, you can certainly. I have nothing against you using that particular weapon if you so choose. That's the thing. People don't understand risk. I think that's something that people have sort of forgotten about is your right to make a risk, to take a chance if you want to, at your own risk, is something that we sort of lost sight of. Perhaps as a society, perhaps only in our country, but we've lost sight of the whole at your own risk thing in a lot of different ways. Perhaps other countries have lost it more than we have, but it seems like a lot of the time, at your own risk is something that's just totally gone out the window. Where if I want to ride my motorcycle, I don't have one, but let's say I do. I want to ride a motorcycle without a helmet. That's kind of, I mean, that's my decision. It's a very poor one, but it's my decision to make. There are areas in the States where you cannot ride a bicycle without a bicycle helmet on. Well, if I want to be dumb and ride a bicycle without a bike helmet on, why can't I do that? I mean, yeah, it's a bad decision. I would not recommend anyone do that. But why can't I just do that? Why not? I mean, it's not a good decision, but it's my decision to make. It's not any sort of legislator in his office sitting down saying, you know, the kids are constantly breaking their heads open on sidewalks. I'm going to pass a law that says that they have to wear helmets. And if they don't, their parents will be fined money. You know, and it seems like it's the state trying to replace good parenting. And obviously, it's kind of working in some ways, not in the way that they want, but the state is replacing parenting in a lot of ways, just not operating in a very good way. I mean, look at the public schooling system that we have, where it's schooling, it's not really education. Like if you ask somebody, if you ask your average school kid who's graduated high school and he's my age, let's say, and you say, you know, what caused the Philippine-American War? They're not going to know. What really pushed Japan to carry out the attacks on Pearl Harbor? They're probably not going to know. A lot of people don't. Of course, it was the embargo, but a lot of people just don't know that. It's strange, actually. So it's really just fascinating how little some people know. Not so much any fault of their own. It's just poor education, lack of education at all, and mostly just schooling, where you're taught to not even really pay your taxes. I'm not sure what you're even taught in school nowadays. It's not very much. Sometimes it seems like you're not taught to balance a checkbook. I can tell you that much. So it's really just it's just a sad situation that my generation, I should say, that my generation is in. It's sad. Fortunately, though, we have an opportunity to fix that. Self-help is a real option now, where we have the internet, whereas we didn't with the last generation, or maybe we did with the last generation, but certainly not the generation before that, where we've had maybe roughly 2 generations that have had real meaningful access to the internet. And that could potentially, and I'm surprised it hasn't yet, killed the school system as it is today. Why do we still have colleges when you have the internet? I mean, yeah, accredited, and you have to get proper papers and all that sort of thing. But why aren't there more universities, I should say, that are offering online courses that are just as accepted as the regular courses that you would take in a real classroom? Why not? We're in a poor economic situation as it is, and a lot of people are realizing the lack of worth that comes with a college degree in the first place. So it's just unfortunate that so many of us have been duped into the whole college thing, or we think that we must have a college degree to make it anywhere or ever. Where I don't have a college degree. I barely went to school. I didn't go to any sort of high school. I was homeschooled for all of my education, and I'm doing just fine. I mean, look at me. I have a career. So it seems kind of unnecessary. People even said to me, why don't you go to college? You're going to want a college degree at some point. And I thought, not really. I mean, if I can land an internship and work my way up from there, I really don't need a college education. So what did I do? I landed myself an internship through a lot of help from other people, by the way. It wasn't all me. I landed myself an internship, and here I am without any sort of college degree. So obviously it can be done, and you can be successful at doing it too. Not quite there yet, but you can do it. So it just proves that a lot of the old systems that we have today are kind of useless, actually. A lot of the old ways of thinking that we have about education, about the workplace, are actually really kind of useless. And it's further exemplified with all these kids who are walking around, people my age, with degrees and nothing to do with them. You know, what do you do with your degree in art? What do you do with your degree in literature? What do you do with your degree in business when there's an oversaturation of the market with people who have degrees in business? What the heck are you going to do with your degree in history? There's not really a whole lot. So it seems like we're being duped into this idea where we have to go to college when really we actually kind of don't. Well, in sad news, by the way, just to throw this out there, unfortunately, the president of Nintendo Japan, Satoru Iwata, I believe I pronounced that right, passed away yesterday at the age of 55. In a brief statement which was posted on Nintendo's Twitter account, they simply stated that he died due to a bile duct growth. So neither the company nor Iwata had spoken about his health issues since the president was forced to skip the Electronic Entertainment Expo back in 2014. So really that is unfortunate, and he certainly did a lot of good for the company, and that's very unfortunate for Mr. Iwata. This is Hot News Talk Radio.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode. What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing about
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240. Hi, this is your computer speaking. I don't feel so well. It's like I've come down with a bug, and I'm getting slower.
Affordable Computers. We fix sick computers. Your hometown guys at Affordable Computers will repair your PC in half the time of the big boys at an affordable price. No tricks, no gimmicks, no computer speak technobabble. Just good, quick, and courteous affordable service and repairs. Want to affordably supercharge your PC? Affordable Computers on Highway 58. Affordable Computers hand builds all desktops in-house. If you're looking for a better-than-new refurb laptop, $150 will get you a Dell or another name brand at Affordable Computers. Affordable Computers, Highway 58, between Arby's and Taco Bell. Also Fort O, Battlefield Parkway, near Holcomb's. Affordable Computers, we service what we sell. Call 499-1975. That's 499-1975.
Wow, this is amazing. I'm feeling great. Supercharged.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Saudi Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection: loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Saudi Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Saudi, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
Do you feel better outside your home or business than in? Indoor air quality is important. Mildew, mold, smoke, water, and rodent damage are prime causes of poor indoor air quality. Ducts Indoor Air Professionals, better known as Duct Busters, cleans HVAC systems using 127 definable Duct Busters steps. Let Mark Thompson address the indoor air quality at your business to help reduce employee illnesses. Prevent fires by cleaning your dryer vents. Mark and his parents, Dick and Joan Thompson, have been building our local economy and helping local people with HVAC systems 16 years. Ducts Indoor Air Professionals. Call 876-9907. 876-9907. Ducts. Call now.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
You love your hometown. Are you interested in free markets, in local economy? Do you hope that Chattanooga can survive the next meltdown, the next chain of disasters in the national economy? What's the best way to live out the ideals of self-government and self-determination? Join me, David Toulis, weekdays 1 to 3.
Hot News Talk 1240.
Love your neighbor, buy local.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Hot News Talk 1240.
Fox News Radio, I'm Pat O'Neill. Democratic presidential hopeful Hillary Clinton making a major policy speech with a focus on helping working families.
Fair pay and fair scheduling, paid family leave and earned sick days, childcare are essential to our competitiveness and our growth.
Clinton in New York also proposing more affordable college plans and tax relief for small businesses. Another Republican joining the crowded GOP field.
Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker made it official in a video announcement.
It's not too late. We can make our country great again.
The most recent Real Clear Politics average of polls has him in second place behind Jeb Bush.
Fox Radio's Rachel Sutherland. The artist chosen to sculpt a Martin Luther King Jr. statue for the Georgia Capitol grounds has died. 53-year-old Andy Davis was on his motorcycle when he was hit by a suspected drunk driver. Fox News, we report, you decide.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
It appears that Boeing has patented the impossible, which is, I don't know if that's surprising or not, actually. Patenting is something that's become a bit of a weird thing recently. Recently, patenting has become sort of a, I want to make this, but not yet sort of thing, where there's an idea that is probably not actually going to ever be made that gets patented simply so that nobody else can use it, or use that particular idea. And also it's to keep the competition from using it, but it's also to ensure that if the competition does want to use it, it has to buy the rights from you. So it's an extra little money maker. In fact, there are whole companies that have their whole business model designed around patenting certain things in order to sell off those patents later. So it's very unfortunate, but that actually is the case with a lot of patents. Now, the patent and copyright system and trademark system is a lot different from how it was originally designed. It used to be there was none whatsoever, and you could do pretty much whatever you wanted, and it was great. But then there was the patent system and the trademark system, the copyright system. What happened was originally it was a 2-year period. Exclusivity period is what they called it, where let's say you've invented a light bulb, right? And you have invented the light bulb like Thomas Edison did. Sort of. So you invent this particular object, and you can only you can make this for 2 years. After that 2-year period, your patent has run out, and you can't renew it. After that 2-year period, your patent has run out, and now the competition can make these light bulbs, and so it gives you an opportunity to recoup your losses and market them yourselves and put yourself on top as the manufacturer of light bulbs or what have you. And once that period is over, then the competition can make these particular items. That's how the patenting system used to work. And now it doesn't. Now companies can, it seems, patent objects for an eternal amount of time and hold that object for an eternal amount of time without anyone making it other than that particular company. So take from that what you will. Some people say it's a good thing. Some people say it's a bad thing. I'm sort of neutral on it because I can see the benefits to both. I think I lean more towards open patenting systems where there really is no exclusivity and anyone can make anything. But anyway. So assume the brace position. According to Ars Technica, Boeing has received a patent for a laser-powered fission jet propulsion system. Yeah, that's not really possible. Boeing envisions that this could replace both rocket and turbofan engines, powering everything from spacecraft to missiles to airplanes. The patent combines inertial confinement fusion, fission, and a turbine that generates electricity. It sounds completely crazy because it is. Currently, this kind of engine is completely unrealistic given our mastery of fusion, which is not there at all. And perhaps in the future, the distant future, this could be a rather ingenious solution. For now, it's yet another patent head-scratcher, which we see a lot of. To begin with, imagine the silhouette of a big turbofan engine, like you'd see on a commercial jetliner. It's sort of a big oval, almost. It's actually sort of a big oval with the very tips sort of cut off. Imagine that shape. Somewhere in the middle of the engine, there's a fusion chamber with a number of very strong lasers focused on one single point. A Hohlraum, or pellet, containing a mix of deuterium and tritium, hydrogen isotopes, is placed at this focal point. The lasers are all turned on at the same instant, creating a massive pressure on the pellet, which implodes and causes the hydrogen atoms to fuse. This is called inertial confinement fusion, as opposed to magnetic confinement fusion that is carried out on a tokamak. According to the patent, these hot gases produced by the fusion are pushed out of a nozzle at the back of the engine, creating thrust. But that's not all. One of the byproducts of a hydrogen fusion is lots of fast neutrons. In Boeing's patented design, there is a shield around the fusion chamber that's coated with a fissionable material, which in this case is uranium-238, and the neutrons hit the fissionable material, causing a fission reaction that then generates lots of heat. So you have heat energy as well. So it's an interesting design, but it's totally impossible right now. And it really just demonstrates the frivolity of the patenting system that we have today, because it's really kind of silly when you think about it. I can patent something that's totally impossible and sort of sit on that and wait. And when it becomes possible, I can be the only person to ever create this kind of engine. I don't know if unfair is the word, because you did think of it, just not late enough, I guess. But it seems a little bit down and dirty, you might say. It seems a little bit low that I can come up with this idea 20 years before it's even possible and sit on it, patent it so nobody else can use it. And finally, when it does become possible, even after I'm dead, the company I worked for can now make that, or a company I owned can now make that. So it really can be said, I didn't build that because I'm dead. Huh. Well, go figure. China has the world's fastest supercomputer. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people, for some reason, seem to think that we're the best at everything in America when really we're not when it comes to a lot of technological things. But China's Tianhe, I think is how you say, 2, is still the fastest supercomputer in the world. We are catching up, though, according to Extreme Tech. The results are in, and they're not a huge surprise. For the 5th consecutive time, China's Tianhe 2 remains the fastest supercomputer in the world, with a LINPACK benchmark performance of 33.86 petaflops, or quadrillions of floating point calculations per second. That's the word for the 45th edition of the twice annual top 500 list of the world's most powerful supercomputers. So this particular supercomputer is on top. Despite the expected results, some interesting bits of info come out about the latest roundup. The United States still has the most systems in the list of any country, with 233, up from 231 6 months ago, and down from 265 in 2013. The second and third place are all from the United States as well. Meanwhile, Europe has 141 machines on the list. Of course, Europe is not one big country, despite what they want us to believe. Significantly, 3 new systems belong to China's Lenovo, although China itself is represented less this time around with 37 supercomputers as opposed to 61 last year. You might consider Lenovo the Chinese version of IBM, which is actually kind of funny because Lenovo actually bought IBM's personal computer business. Have you ever purchased a ThinkPad? Well, if you bought it in the last 10 years, then it's a Lenovo ThinkPad, not an IBM ThinkPad. Reason being, Lenovo bought the ThinkPad and ThinkCenter brand from IBM. Thus, Lenovo is the only company which can manufacture those because they bought it from IBM. IBM now mainly works in business machines, hence the name. IBM now works more, or rather less, in consumer electronics, more in business electronics, while Lenovo is swiftly working towards consumer electronics more and more. And actually, I'm using a Lenovo phone right now, so go figure. The average performance of the top 500 has gone up considerably in the past 6 months. The total combined performance of all 500 supercomputers has reached 363 petaflops, compared with 309 last November and 274 1 year ago. 98% of the systems use processors that have 6 cores or more, while 88.2 have at least 8 cores per CPU. 88 of the 500 systems use accelerator coprocessors, including NVIDIA, ATI Radeon, and Intel Xeon Phi. 4 of the systems use a combination of Xeon and NVIDIA processors. Now, this is getting into highly technical territory that is going even over my head, which is not that hard to do anyway. So, needless to say, China is actually ahead in supercomputer territory, which isn't really that surprising, actually. You have to consider how the communist system works versus the capitalist system. It's interesting when you think about it. Let's put some thought towards this because I was thinking about this yesterday. Okay, so in a communist system, really the state kind of owns manufacturing on a lot of different things. Whereas in a capitalist system, the state has to contract a contractor in order to get anything that it wants. So let's say the United States needs 500 M16s. Well, the United States can't just build 500 M16s. There has to be a contract. The state can't actually build anything. There must be a contract. So the state will contract with, say, Colt, which it did in the 60s, to build 500 M16s. Okay, cool. Well, in a communist system, that's where they almost have a leg up. It's a very small leg up, but it is a leg up. In a communist system, the state owns manufacturing. So the state has a state sweatshop where they can pay whatever or nothing to different people to manufacture, in this case, of course, AK-47s, SKSs, Tokarev TT handguns, Makarov handguns, Nagant revolvers, Mosin Nagant bolt-action rifles, what have you. Any sort of firearm you want can be produced for a much lower price and in much greater quantities because you really don't have to pay the workers all that much. And you're not having a contract out to have them built, so you can make however many you want, and it's all up to you. So that's where there's a bit of a leg up. The same sort of thing could be said about computer manufacturing as well. The Soviet Union actually had a really good copy, almost indistinguishable copies of the IBM, or rather not IBM, pardon me, the Intel 8088 processor. In case you don't know, the Intel 8088 processor was what most processors today are based upon. If you ever heard of x86 architecture, it's actually based on 8086. 8088 was then the successor to that. It goes on. But anyway, the Soviet Union actually had basically perfect copies of the Intel 8088 processor. and you can buy like boxes of them on Amazon or eBay. You can buy boxes of 12 of these processors on eBay. Now that would be thousands of dollars, like $12,000 easy back in the 80s to get one of those. It's cheaper in the Soviet Union though, because the state produces them. See, all really the state has to do is acquire the resources and then force people to build the stuff, and that's it. So a communist system kind of has a leg up in production in that sense. Of course, run out of resources and you've lost the game, which is what happened, of course, with the Soviet Union, except the resource was actually kind of food at that point. So it's interesting how communism versus capitalism can be prepared or can be compared. I should say prepared. No, compared when you look at the different methods of manufacture and how really the method of manufacture is the same. It's just how you go about that manufacture, or how you go about making that method happen. That's a little bit different, and that's how, of course, we have millions, literally millions of Mosin Nagants around nowadays, and there are millions and millions of AK-47s around because both the Soviet Union, like the SFR of Russia, and the satellite states all made AK-47s, state-produced AK-47s. So you have Yugoslav ones, you have Russian ones, you have Egyptian ones sometimes. Of course, Egypt was not an SFR, but you get the picture. So it's interesting how that works, and of course China too. So it's interesting how that works, and it really is an interesting picture of how different it is in terms of communism versus capitalism. It really is it's a big difference. Think about the space race, where the Soyuz is a great rocket. The Russian space program was actually really good. There were a lot of firsts with the Russian space program, but the people, of course, took pride in that because it was a communist effort. But it's not really the same as what we did here, where there were contractors or people who were being paid, people who put pride in their work, building these different rockets. And I'm sure some of the designers in the Soviet Union also put pride in their work, but it just doesn't seem quite the same when you compare the two. And for some odd reason, people say that, oh, communism can work if it's in a certain system. Communism can work if it's run by an AI. Maybe it could, I don't know. Communism can work if we're in these particular circumstances. Those particular circumstances might be met for a few years, but then somebody who's corrupt is going to take over. It's not sustainable long term. Neither is crony capitalism. Don't get confused. Crony capitalism is not sustainable either. That's what we have now. Free market capitalism, on the other hand, is extremely sustainable because it's decentralized. A decentralized system is pretty sustainable because there's no head to cut off. It's not like it's sort of like a hydra. You cut off one head and another one just pops up. It's not like Hercules, where you cut off one head and that's it. It's or Cyclops, I should say. You cut off one head and that's it. It's not like that. With a decentralized system, there are many different prongs that you have to defeat in order to defeat the entire thing, and it's really not possible. So that's why free market capitalism is a much better system than communist manufacture and state-owned manufacture and all that sort of thing. So it's an interesting parallel to be made anyway. That can be made just by looking at manufacture of firearms. Lots can be learned from guns. If you look at the story behind guns, you can learn a lot more about history than you can from a school book. It's actually kind of interesting. Well, speaking of governments, the U.S. government has reported a number of wiretaps that kind of don't actually add up. The government published its latest wiretap report on July the 1st. The headline finding was that, according to Ars Seneca, by the way, the finding was that encryption wasn't foiling federal and state local law enforcement, despite a growing chorus of people suggesting that we're all going to die unless the tech sector builds backdoor access into their products to enable government access. In all, the federal agency that oversees the courts reported to Congress that there were 3,554 wiretaps in 2014, about 1% less than the year prior. Of the total, only actually about 4 were thwarted via encryption. That's a lot to be thwarted by encryption, and it's probably state-level encryption, so that's a little bit better than what we can do. But the reporting number of wiretaps by the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts simply doesn't really add up. That's according to Albert Gidari, one of the nation's top privacy lawyers. He says there's a bigger story, and he calls into question the AO's accounting, saying, since the Snowden revelations, more and more companies have started publishing transparency reports about the number and nature of government demands to access to their users' data. AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint published data for 2014 earlier this year, and T-Mobile published its first transparency report on the same day that the AO released the wiretap report. In aggregate, the 4 companies state that they implemented 10,712 wiretaps, a threefold difference over the total that's been reported by the government. Note that the 10,712 number is only for the 4 companies listed and does not reflect wiretap orders received by other telephone carriers or online providers. So the discrepancy is actually quite large. Think about it. Comcast is not on that list. Charter is not on that list. What we use here, EPB, is not on that list. Notice that. So if these different companies did transparency reports, I guarantee you that number would be significantly larger. So what's going on here? Is the government lying? Are the companies lying? What's going on? Well, how can that be is a question that Ars Technica is asking. Even taking into account some accounting complexities, Ghidiari says the numbers are still off by more than twofold in one scenario. Are wiretaps being consistently underreported to Congress and the public, he's asking. Based on the data reported by the 4 major carriers for 2013 and 2014, it certainly does appear that that is the case. In an email to Ars Technica, he also said, we are still off by 30%, even if all 4 carriers got the same order and covered multiple devices. Charles Hall, who's an AO spokesperson, told Ars in an email that the agency was investigating the discrepancy, meaning that perhaps there is some credence to the claim that there's a discrepancy going on here. So what does this mean for us? Well, the government is not being held accountable for much of anything. That's not surprising. I mean, look at what's happening with OPM, and we're going to talk about that in a second too. The government is not being held accountable for its slip-ups, and there have been quite a few slip-ups just recently. Wiretaps are one thing because the government is perpetrating these wiretaps, and so the companies kind of have to publish their transparency reports, and the government technically has to publish one too. So what's happened is the companies who offer up transparency reports have offered up theirs, and the number of wiretaps that they're reporting is much, much higher than what the government is reporting. Now, you might think, well, it's just a mistake. No, it's like twofold, as in it's double what the government is reporting, sometimes triple. That leads to some problems, right? Where say the government says, oh, we've only done 2,000 wiretaps this year. And then T-Mobile says, we've received 10,000 wiretaps this year. That seems like a bit of a problem. And it is. And nobody's really getting the questions answered, unfortunately. I mean, not that there's a lack of reporting, although there is. It's more a problem of lack of accountability, where who's really in government to say that the Office of Transparency, if there is one, is operating in a poor manner? Nobody's there to really say that. Nobody's there to say, hey, the NSA is breaking the law here. Nobody's really there to say that. Whistleblowers are, of course, but not really any sort of official entity. There's not really any entity that is there just for accountability. So we're seeing an astonishing lack of accountability. And really, it's not surprising, but it's disappointing nonetheless. As it is now, the government can essentially just get away with lying, and there's not much that can be done about it. Even if somebody in government gets caught lying, I mean, look at Hillary Clinton just as an example, not much happens. Her career is still doing just fine, actually. Okay, look at the president, a current example. The president said, if you like your carrier, you can keep that carrier. That's not really panning out to be true because you can't, or your healthcare provider, I should say. If you like your healthcare provider, you can keep your healthcare provider. Well, that's not really true. So that's another lie, but really not many people are upset about that to a degree which I think people should be. Now, yeah, that's a past matter, and getting upset about it now really isn't going to solve anything. But it still shows that there's not really any accountability whatsoever other than just, hey, look, the government lied, and the government says, well, stuff happens. And that's about as far as it goes. Well, we're seeing that with the OPM as well, the Office of Personnel Management. The OPM got hacked, and the writer for Ars Technica says, all I got was a stupid email. So he says, my data was hacked. He says, as anyone who reads Ars Technica no doubt knows by now, the Federal Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, has been hacked pretty hard, losing data on some 21.5 million people. The agency's director just resigned over the situation. But exactly why does the hack matter? What was exposed and how sensitive was that information? Well, hopefully that question is going to be answered by this Ars Technica article. OPM is sort of, but not quite, the government's human resources department of sorts. Most federal workers probably know OPM as the agency that tells them whether or not they've got a snow day. But OPM also handles background checks for sensitive positions, and this motherload of data is now in the hands of whoever got it, because we don't know yet. Yeah, people say, ooh, the Chinese government. Some people say, ooh, the Russian government. We don't actually know for sure. And even so, it could have been somebody here in the States who just routed their traffic through Chinese servers. So you really can't know. OPM is sort of, but not quite like the government's human resources department. From 2009 until the beginning of June this year, the writer of the article worked as a policy analyst at the National Institutes of Health. That's a pretty harmless position, really. I mean, I don't really appreciate it when anyone at all works for the government, but the National Institute of Health, I mean, come on, that's not that bad. The position required a public trust clearance, which is essentially an FBI background check. During the application process, he says he filled out a form called SF85P that required the usual stuff that you'd expect: height, weight, eye color, hair color. Imagine the same information you put in to get a driver's license with a little bit more about every job you've ever had, your wife's birth name, your parents' names, every foreign trip you've made, all that sort of thing. Several months later, a man knocked on the door of his office, introduced himself as an agent, and spent the next 45 minutes asking him a lot of questions about his background and about the answers on SF85P. And long story short, it appears that that person has kind of been hacked and the identity has been stolen. So what do? You get an email from the OPM. Hooray. So he says now all of the personal information is in the hands of the adversary, whoever that may be. What does that mean for this writer? Well, we don't know, actually. What makes all of this so much worse is that the data on that the adversary got is chicken feed compared to that found in SF86 forms of people whose national security jobs involve classified, secret, top secret, or compartmented information. So now the adversary, whoever that may be, has that information. This data isn't just credit card numbers and all that sort of thing. No, it's everything about you that the government would ever want to know, which is basically everything. So you could rather easily guess the person, say the wife's maiden name, because that information is on that form. You could use that to retrieve your email password, and there you go. You know, as simple as that. I forgot my email password. Well, what's your wife's maiden name is a security question. Well, that happens to be the answer that's on form SF85B. So you have that answer. So now you can get into somebody's email account. From their email account, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So it's a difficult situation for a lot of people. And we don't know who the perpetrator is. We don't know what the perpetrator is. If it was an automated thing, if it was a state-sponsored thing, we don't know. And the OPM is really not being held very accountable for what happened, despite the fact that there is a pretty big discrepancy there when it comes to security. I mean, we're supposed to trust the National Security Agency to secure us, and they're really not. We're supposed to trust the Office of Personnel Management to, manage personnel, and they're really not. So who can you trust in government? Seems like nobody really is the answer. You really can't trust much of anyone in government. That's a crying shame, but again, not surprising. No state can be trusted. I don't trust any state because I'm given no reason to. Seriously, give me a reason to trust the U.S. government, and maybe I'll consider it. But I haven't really been given a very good one. I do, however, trust markets to some degree, whereas I trust the person at a local store much more than I would say trust the government, because I at least have a personal connection. You can't possibly have a personal connection with the government. It's not possible. This is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a bit more. Nukenomics.com and David Toulos is coming up in just a few seconds right here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, 1190, and hotnewstalkradio.com as well. If you go to hotnewstalkradio.com, you can click on the half off link for great deals.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode.